The footprints are almost gone. A light rain has been falling across the valley for hours, turning the soil dark and heavy. Along the edge of a river, a child bends down and presses a hand into the mud. 5 fingers, a palm, a familiar shape. Nearby, another handprint appears, larger, whiter, strangely powerful, not quite human, not quite something else. For a brief moment, 30,000 years ago, 2 worlds stood beside the same river. Then one vanished, or at least, that is what we tell ourselves. Most people think human history is a story of survival. One species emerged, the others disappeared. The winners inherited the earth, the losers became fossils. But history is rarely that neat, because hidden beneath museums, textbooks, and the comforting certainty of the past lies an unsettling fact. For most of human existence, we were not alone. There was another kind of human. They walked, they hunted, they loved, they buried their dead. They survived ice ages that would have destroyed entire civilizations. And for thousands of years, they shared this planet with us. The Neanderthals. Today, they exist only as bones and fragments of DNA. A closed chapter, a completed story, except the evidence keeps pointing towards something stranger. Because the more scientists uncover, the less Neanderthals resemble the primitive creatures we once imagined. And the more they resemble us, which raises a question that becomes increasingly uncomfortable the longer you think about it. What if they had survived? Not for a few extra centuries, not hidden in some isolated valley. What if they survived all the way to the present day? What would the modern world look like if another human species still lived among us? And perhaps more importantly, what would that reveal about ourselves? Because this is not really a story about Neanderthals. It is a story about what happens when humanity is forced to confront the possibility that it was never meant to be alone. To understand that possibility, we need to begin in a world that no longer exists. A world of ice. 20,000 years before the pyramids, before agriculture, before cities, before history itself, winter ruled much of the northern hemisphere. Great glaciers stretched across continents like frozen oceans. Entire landscapes disappeared beneath walls of ice, thousands of feet thick. Temperatures collapsed. Ecosystems fractured. Animals migrated. Many vanished forever. Yet, amid this brutal world, Neanderthals endured. Most people imagine survival as intelligence defeating nature. That is not what happened. The Ice Age rewarded something different: resilience, strength, adaptation. The Neanderthal body appears almost engineered for cold. Short limbs reduced heat loss. Massive muscles generated warmth. Heavy bones carried extraordinary strength. Their chests were broad, their faces projected forward, perhaps helping warm, frigid air before it entered their lungs. Everything about them reflected a long conversation with an unforgiving climate. And for hundreds of thousands of years, they succeeded. Long before our species entered Europe, Neanderthals had already mastered it. They knew the migrations, the seasons, the dangerous valleys, the sheltering caves, the rhythms of a frozen continent. They were not invaders. They were natives. Then something unexpected appeared. Us. Not suddenly, not dramatically. A few scattered groups at first, small populations moving northward from Africa, fragile compared to the giants already living there. Most people imagine that humans arrived and immediately dominated. The evidence suggests a far more complicated story. For thousands of years, both species occupied the same landscapes. They saw one another, watched one another, learned from one another, sometimes feared one another, and eventually, they touched. The proof exists inside billions of people alive today. Tiny fragments of Neanderthal DNA still move through modern bodies, a biological memory of encounters so ancient that no story survived to describe them. Think about that for a moment. Every heartbeat in certain populations may carry genetic instructions inherited from another human species. Not an ape, not a distant ancestor, another human, one that met us face to face. The implication is difficult to escape. The boundary we imagine between them and us was never as solid as we like to believe. And that realization changes everything, because extinction suddenly stops looking inevitable. If 2 human species could coexist, communicate, and even reproduce, then perhaps history balanced on a knife edge. Perhaps the disappearance of Neanderthals was not destiny. Perhaps it was an accident, a shift in climate, a disease, competition for resources, bad luck stretched across generations. Researchers still debate the answer, and the uncertainty itself is revealing. Because if scientists cannot fully explain why Neanderthals vanished, then it becomes possible to imagine a world where they did not. A single winter unfolds differently. A migration route changes. A population survives. A disease never arrives. And history bends. Not dramatically at first, just enough for another branch of humanity to remain alive. And from that moment onward, every century becomes unfamiliar. Every empire, every religion, every war, every scientific revolution, all unfolding beneath a reality modern humans have never experienced: the presence of another human species, not in mythology, not in memory, but standing beside us. And that would create a problem civilization has never had to solve. Because humans struggle to agree on what it means to be human, even when only one species exists. Imagine the consequences when there are two. Would Neanderthals possess rights, citizenship, political representation? Could they own property? Would they be considered a separate people? History offers uncomfortable clues. Human beings have repeatedly divided themselves over language, religion, skin color, nationality, tribe, and culture. Differences that are often superficial. Now imagine a difference written directly into biology. A difference visible the moment someone enters a room. A broader face, a heavier frame, a distinct lineage stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The potential for cooperation would be enormous, but so would the potential for fear, because throughout history, humans have shown a remarkable ability to transform difference into hierarchy. And suddenly the question changes. The question is no longer whether Neanderthals could survive. The question becomes whether modern civilization could survive the existence of another intelligent human species without eventually creating a system that placed one above the other. And that possibility reveals something deeply unsettling. The greatest threat to Neanderthal survival might never have been the Ice Age. It might have been us. Yet there is another possibility, one even stranger. What if coexistence changed us as much as it changed them? What if art evolved differently? What if science advanced differently? What if philosophy itself developed around a world containing multiple forms of humanity? Because every civilization is built upon assumptions, and one assumption sits quietly beneath almost every human institution: that we are unique, that humanity is singular, that there is only one version of us. A surviving Neanderthal civilization would destroy that assumption completely, and once it disappears, the modern world becomes almost impossible to predict. Because the existence of another human species would force a question so profound that it echoes beyond biology itself. What exactly are we? Not where we came from, not what we believe. What are we? A species? A category? A temporary branch on a much larger tree? The answer becomes less obvious the longer Neanderthals remain alive. And in that uncertainty lies something almost haunting, because perhaps the strangest consequence of Neanderthal survival would not be what we learn about them. It would be what we learn about ourselves. The possibility that humanity was never a single story, only the last survivor of many. And in another version of history, we would not be looking at Neanderthal bones through museum glass. We would be passing them on the street, seeing another pair of intelligent eyes looking back, a reminder that evolution never promised one humanity, only possibilities. And somewhere in the silence between those possibilities lies the world that never happened.